To commemorate the 80th anniversary of the liberation of BARR, we would like to remind those who witnessed the days of November 28 and 29, 1944. It is essential for us to preserve the memory of these historic events as faithfully as possible, while at the same time paying tribute to those who were killed in the town of BARR during those painful hours when the city was liberated from Nazi oppression. The date is November 27, 1944. American troops had broken through into Alsace on November 23, when Strasbourg was liberated by General Leclerc's 2nd French Armored Division, under American command. From Schirmeck, via Molsheim and Aubernay, a platoon of the 48th American Tank Battalion entered the battle at Vaaf, crossed the village and then withdrew. The main column entered Goxwiller, then Gertwiller, with the 25th Tank Battalion and a company of the 62nd Armored Infantry. Artillery is deployed at Niederney, to cover the combat zone. The 411th Infantry Regiment, part of the 103rd Infantry Division coming from Breitenbach, reached the Howold, which was liberated around 10 p.m. On the German side, the Bittermann Battalion was ordered to retake Gertwiller, which had fallen into American hands, but remained blocked at the western entrance to the village, along the railway line. Prior to the unit's arrival, on the night of November 27 to 28, BARR was virtually devoid of any German military presence. The following day, Tuesday, November 28, the Germans took advantage of the night to infiltrate Gertwiller. The American 14th Armored Division re-attacked the village, finally liberating it.at around 2 p.m. A second column of the 14th Division entered BARR on the Heiligenstein Road, with the 48th Tank Battalion and a company of the 62nd Armored Infantry. The 411th Infantry Regiment, coming from Howold, arrived at the entrance to BARR via the valley, and joined forces with the 14th Armored Division to take back control of BARR. The German Bake Battle Group engaged in hostilities at BARR with the column of the 48th Tank Battalion of the American 14th Armored Division. It is these battles in BARR that we are going to describe, based on the testimonies of those who took part in them. BARR was a strong point, a heavily defended strong point, alive with enemy infantry, supported by tanks and anti-tank guns and bazooka men, snipers and machine gunners, roadblocks. The German had power there, and his strength was underestimated. Private Hugh Warren West testifies.
Our unit was ordered to lead the way again, followed closely by the 48th Tank Battalion. Along the way, we encountered a few more roadblocks. Some of them were undefended, but we still had to be careful. The relatively light resistance didn't prepare us for what lay ahead. The German army held BARR in force, with every intention of stopping our advance there. Of course, we didn't know that as we approached. It was the first of many cases in which our intelligence arm had grossly underestimated enemy strength. But we knew there would be fighting in BARR, so our armored units led the way. In what would become a sad litany repeated again and again, our lead tank was slammed by an unseen 88. It lurched and stopped dead, issuing smoke and then a raging fire. Its crew never made it to the hatches. The whole column of tanks went into action, deploying outwardly and firing their guns rapidly. The explosions continued in an unbroken roar, sending black smoke skyward and raining debris all over the surrounding area. Infantrymen dove for cover as the small arms fire erupted from buildings. Lieutenant John Craker ordered us forward. He always lingered behind to check the rear, and it was common to see him venture into no man's land to collect our wounded when nobody else wanted that almost suicidal duty. We sped toward the town in our vehicles, but soon had to stop when a German 88 zeroed in on our supporting tanks. One of them blew up following a direct hit. Craker directed our attack toward the 88, and one of our bazooka teams circled around for a clear shot and knocked it out. But we were far removed from accolades as our units moved into BARR. What followed was an ugly slugging match, our tanks inching through the streets, firing their guns and receiving hits from hidden enemy anti-tank units. Every one of the tanks took a hit, some of them repeatedly. One by one, they burst into flame. Their crews scrambled out of smoking hatches, only to be shot down by small arms fire. Nearly every place above ground was riddled with flying steel fragments and bits of masonry and glass that would tear through human flesh like it was soft butter. Men lay beside their tanks, missing arms or legs. Some were not recognizable human beings. The firing became so intense that one of our companies had to pull back out of town, leaving behind their wounded. It was something that happened only in the most severe firefights. Every house had the potential for a deadly ambush, and so every house became our target.
Company A's story is as heroic, as bloody, as bitter. Sergeant Forrest Gable was leading the column. A recon jeep and armored car were fired on and put out of action before they got to town. Gable moved up. He fired into a house suspiciously well located, later found he had knocked out a German anti-tank gun and its crew. He moved into the broad square in the center of town and an anti-tank gun fired at him. Across 100 yards of the gray cobbled street, from the window of a hospital, he fired back and knocked out that gun. An enemy bazooka man appeared and Private Dennis L. Hennessy, loader and radio tender, cut him down with a submachine gun, and at that moment the tank was hit in quick succession by 2 enemy bazooka rounds. Sergeant Gable immediately directed artillery fire against the hostile position, thereby enabling the wounded men to escape. When his 75mm ammunition was exhausted, he crawled to the rear of the tank and, despite intense automatic weapons fire, he continued to fire with his .50 caliber machine gun. Disdaining retreat, he held his position until killed by enemy fire. By his extraordinary heroism and unselfish sacrifice, Sergeant Gable enabled 3 wounded comrades to escape and effected the successful withdrawal of his platoon. Corporal Knott Rankin, gunner in the tank, stayed at his sweating death-ridden seat until he had fired every round of his ammunition, and as he tried to escape was killed. The confusion mounted. Lieutenant Edgar Woodward's platoon was ordered to move back out of town, but the tanks took a wrong road and ended up in the middle of town. In the center of town, Lieutenant Woodward's 4 tanks met men of the 103rd Infantry Division coming in. One of his company commanders and Sergeant Costa of B-48 started out with a group of infantrymen to reconnoiter. A man in civilian clothes ran across in front of them. The infantryman shouted halt, and when he did not, opened fire. The man fell and 2 German machine guns at the end of the street caught the reconnaissance party in a slashing crossfire. Infantrymen fell and the party was pinned to the ground till a tank blew out the machine guns. Colonel Ferris's tank was hit by an anti-tank barrage. Colonel Ferris was seriously wounded. His invaluable testimony sheds light on the circumstances of this tragedy.
We proceeded slowly into the city, matter of fact through the center of town. I recall City Hall as we passed. Movement was not obstructed until the exit of town, right opposite Bossert's house. There was a roadblock that must have taken 2 days to construct. It required the howitzer platoon to break it down then, allowing passage for a single vehicle at a time. The S3 tank got through and radioed me that there was a T gun to the left. At the time our main gun, 75mm, was oriented right. Before we could traverse left, the tank was hit by 2 rounds which penetrated the sponson armor and entered vehicle. I was standing and the shot penetrated my left leg. The other round cut LT Kaufman in the middle. The vehicle immediately caught fire. I gave command, evacuate, but could not move an inch. I was stuck. My gunner used his shoulder to push me up, and then actually pushed me over the side. Small wonder I did not receive severe fractures due to the 8 to 9 foot drop. We found ourselves in a fenced yard, and all the while small arms fire coming at us. Our sidearms left in the tank. Gunner, Sergeant Kiley, saw a basement window that appeared accessible. He pushed and pulled there too, and as luck would have it, there was coal chute right to the ground level. A swift push and we were both rolling down the chute. Hardly a deep breath, and we found the entire basement occupied by uniformed German soldiers. I bade goodbyes to Kylie, but then the enemy personnel pulled me further inside. They summoned an enemy medic who taped my wounds and offered oral antiseptic, which I refused. The hostile personnel evacuated the house, and two very young teenagers, Jean-Jacques Bossert and brother, hauled me in a wagon to village hospital. Many wounded German, French, and US were being treated by Dr. Marcel Krieg.
Soldier Howard Knapp remembers.
I was 19 years old, the loader and radio operator. Lieutenant Kaufman was sitting on my lap, and flames enveloped us as I pushed him out of the hatch. I remember the stump of his leg passing in front of my face. Then, there was an explosion, and I was blown out of the tank. I awoke with hand and facial burns, a dislocated left hip, 2 broken knees, and 3 breaks in my right leg, which also had multiple shrapnel wounds. As we lay on the ground, I spoke to Lieutenant Kaufman. He was aware of the loss of his leg, but I was unable to help him because I was temporarily blind from the facial burns, and my hands were also severely burned. To this day, I regret that I was unable to put a tourniquet on his leg to help save his life. The battle raged over us. We spoke occasionally, and then he was silent.
Colonel Ferris' tank, following into town, was hit at a roadblock. The 2nd platoon was blocked off. Lieutenant George H. Herbert saw he couldn't get by and swung his tanks to try another street, and the inferno closed in on him. His tanks were hit and burst into flames until he had only one left, and Herbert was killed. Staff Sergeant William Winslow was taking in the 3rd platoon. He passed 2 roadblocks and stopped to reconnoiter by fire, blasting a house straight before him. An anti-tank gun laid 3 rounds into his tank and it burst into flames the sudden incredible way a tank burns. And Captain Blackwell had 9 of his tanks in flames in an hour, and 10 of them knocked out. B Company was ordered to pull back out of town, leaving their tanks and their wounded, their dead and their missing. The company was in bad shape. There were only 5 tanks in operating condition and the morale of the men was at its lowest ebb. On November 28, 1944 at 4 p.m., the message of liberation of BARR was sent to the 103rd Infantry Division headquarters.
Message code 17723. Town BARR. Taken this afternoon 16:00 p.m. by 1227 Infantry Battalions and 7th Command Corps of 103rd Infantry Division. Out.
More than 100 American soldiers were killed in the BARR area between November 27 and November 30, 1944. 8 inhabitants of BARR lost their lives in the fighting for liberation. This document is dedicated to all these victims. May present and future generations not forget the past and, strengthened by its memory, build a better future.